I'm 94 years old. I've outlived 3 business partners, 2 wives, and more friendships than I have fingers to count them on. I've watched 11 people I would have staked my life on, walk away from me the moment I stopped being useful to them. Not strangers, not enemies, people who sat at my table, held my children, borrowed my money, and looked me in the eye while they did it. 11. And not one of them called it what it was. I'm going to tell you the single most dangerous word you carry around in your chest every single day of your life. A word that will cost you decades. Decades you cannot get back if you don't hear what I'm about to say. Not from a book, not from a therapist, from a 94-year-old man who paid for this lesson in the only currency that actually matters: time. That word is loyalty, and I need you to stay with me because what I'm going to tell you isn't what you expect. It isn't coming from a bitter man. It's coming from a man who has finally, at 94, made his peace. And I want that peace for you while you still have time to use it. I was born in 1931 in a mill town called Keighley in West Yorkshire, England, a place that smelled every morning of coal smoke and damp wool drifting through kitchen windows that never quite sealed properly. My father was a factory foreman. My mother kept the books for the local church, 6 pence in, 6 pence out, every entry in her careful hand. We were not poor, but we were exact. Every morning at 5 o'clock, the mill whistle blew, and every house on Cavendish Street stirred. And every morning, without fail, my father put on the same blue wool jacket, thick as a horse blanket, gone soft at the elbows, hung it by the door the night before so it was ready. He wore that jacket for 22 years. He called it dependable. He meant himself. That was the world I grew up in, a world where a man's word meant more than any contract, where you didn't need paperwork because you had reputation, where loyalty wasn't a value you discussed, it was the air you breathed. Nobody in Keighley talked about being loyal any more than a fish talks about being wet. You simply were, or you weren't, and everyone knew which. I absorbed it the way children absorb everything, without question, without examination, as though it were gravity itself. This is how the world works. This is what makes a man. By the time I was in my 30s, working in textile trade and starting to build something, I had a philosophy I didn't even know I held. Give loyalty first, give it generously, and it will return to you. I lent money on a handshake. I covered for colleagues when covering cost me something. I showed up, to funerals, to failures, to the ugly Tuesday afternoons when nobody else came. I was the man you called. I was proud of that. I genuinely believed I was building something, some invisible architecture of trust that would hold me up when I needed holding. I didn't know then that the very thing I believed would protect me was the thing that would slowly hollow me out. There was a man named Gerald. I'll tell you about Gerald properly in a moment. But I want you to keep that name somewhere in your mind as I tell you what came next, because Gerald is not the villain of this story. I was. This channel is for people who have lived long enough to know things and who aren't afraid to say them plainly. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe, hit the bell. There are more people like me here, men and women who learned the hard way, and what we carry might save you the decades we lost learning it. You've given me this much of your time. Give me a little more. For 60 years, I operated on a single belief: give loyalty freely, and it will come back to you. 60 years. I want you to hold that number. That is not a phase. That is not a rough patch. That is the architecture of an entire life, built on a premise I never once stopped to examine. In 1961, my business partner Gerald had a dispute with the tax office. A serious one, the kind that ends careers. I lied for him. Not a small lie, a deliberate, premeditated lie told to a government official in a room with fluorescent lights and a metal desk with Gerald sitting beside me. We walked out together. Gerald clapped me on the shoulder, said, "I won't forget this." He forgot it before we reached the car park. I told myself he was just relieved. I told myself that's how men are. They feel things they don't always say. I had an answer for everything. Then there was David, a different partner, brought in when Gerald and I expanded in the late 1960s. I gave David a 30% stake in the business. No contract, no solicitor, just a handshake, because contracts were for people who didn't trust each other, and I trusted David. In 1971, David sold his share to a competitor, a man I'd been battling for 5 years. And I found out not from David, but from the competitor himself, who rang to introduce himself as our new partner. David had sent a letter to the office, addressed to the company, not to me. I stood in the reception hall holding that letter, and my secretary, a young woman named Patricia, was watching me from behind her typewriter, and I said, "Everything's fine," because I was the loyal one, and the loyal one doesn't fall apart in reception. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote David's name in my ledger under a column I'd never used before. And still, I told myself it was an anomaly. Still, I told myself that David was the exception, not the rule. That one man's failure didn't indict the principle. I was very good at that. Very good at building small courtrooms in my head and acquitting the people I'd chosen to believe in. My nephew Martin came to work for us in 1974. He was 23, my sister's boy, bright-eyed and a little careless in the way young men are when they know someone will catch them. I knew within 6 months he wasn't right for the work. My accountant, a small, precise woman named Miriam, who wore the same pearl earrings every day and never once raised her voice, came to me in the spring of 1975 and said, without drama, without cruelty, "You give people credit before they've earned it. One day it will break you." I thanked her. I told myself she was a cynic. I kept Martin on for another 4 years, during which time he helped himself to just over £4,000 from the petty accounts, slowly, carefully, in amounts small enough to look like rounding errors. When I finally found it, he didn't apologize. He said, "I thought you wouldn't mind." Family loyalty. That's what I'd given him. That's what it purchased. And then my first wife, Eleanor, a quiet woman, observant in the way that quiet people are, seeing everything, said to me one evening in 1977, standing at the kitchen sink with her back to me, not even turning around when she said it, "You're loyal to a version of people that doesn't exist anymore." I didn't answer her. I walked into the sitting room and turned on the television and told myself she was tired. She wasn't tired. She was finished. She had been watching me for years, watching me lend money that didn't come back, cover for men who didn't deserve covering, stay in rooms past the point where staying served any purpose. And she had drawn her conclusion quietly, privately, the way Eleanor did everything. I told myself it was a difficult year. Week after week, month after month, I collected these moments and filed them somewhere I never looked. Gerald's silence after the tax office, David's letter to the company, Martin's £4,000. Eleanor's back at the kitchen sink. And still I kept the faith. Still I believed. It was a Thursday, November 9th, 1989. I was 58 years old. I know the date because the Berlin Wall had come down the night before. I'd fallen asleep watching it on the news, and I woke just past midnight to the sound of the central heating clicking off, the house going perfectly, completely silent around me. Eleanor was gone by then. We'd divorced in 1983, after 14 years of staying for reasons I called loyalty and she called fear. The sitting room was lit by a single lamp in the corner, the one with the green glass shade she'd chosen. On the table, there was a cream envelope, thick paper, Gerald's handwriting on the front, that particular slant he had, letters leaning slightly left, as though bracing against wind. I sat down in the armchair, my father's armchair. He'd given it to us when we married, brown leather gone the color of old tea, the left arm worn down to the seam where I'd rested my hand 10,000 times. I picked up the envelope. The paper was cold and stiff, the way paper gets in an unheated room. Outside, somewhere down the street, a cat crossed under a sodium lamp. I could see it through the gap in the curtain. Orange light, black cat, gone in a second. I opened the letter. 3 paragraphs. Gerald was dissolving our final shared venture, effective immediately. He cited irreconcilable differences in business philosophy. He wished me well. He used the word sincerely before his name. 28 years. I read it 3 times, and then I sat with it in my lap and I understood, not emotionally, not as a feeling, but with the cold clarity of a man looking at arithmetic that finally, irrefutably adds up. I understood. Loyalty is not a mutual contract. It was a story I had been telling myself about other people. The story was mine. It had always been only mine. I thought of the tax office. I thought of David's letter to the company. I thought of Martin and his £4,000. I thought of Eleanor at the kitchen sink. And I understood that none of these people had promised me what I believed they'd promised me. I had made the promise myself and handed them the bill. Gerald owed me 28 years of returned faith. In his mind, he owed me nothing. He was right. I was 58 years old, alone in an armchair my dead father had given me, holding a letter from a man I had lied to a government official to protect, and the thought I had, the thought I am not ashamed to tell you because you need to hear it, was, I have been a fool. Not a victim, not an innocent man betrayed. A fool. A proud, deliberate, willful fool who mistook his own generosity for a transaction and then felt robbed when no one paid. I sat there until 2 a.m. The lamp stayed on, the house stayed silent. And somewhere around 2 o'clock, I made a decision, not dramatically, not with any particular feeling. I simply stopped writing Gerald's name in my diary as something to follow up on. That was all. A very small, very quiet act of finally seeing clearly. Not because I stopped caring, I want you to understand that. Not because I became cold or cynical or closed, but because I finally admitted at 58 years old, 28 years too late, that Gerald had never cared in the way I had assigned to him. And you cannot mourn the loss of something that was never there. Within a week, I had done something I had never done in my adult life. I sat down with a piece of paper and I wrote, not the names of people I trusted, but what each of them had actually done in the last 2 years to demonstrate that trust. Behaviors, not history, not intentions, not how I felt about them, what they had done. The list was very short, shorter than I expected, and looking at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt the beginning of something like relief. I started, slowly, to stop performing loyalty for audiences who weren't watching. When a former associate rang to ask a favor, the kind of favor I would once have granted instantly, reflexively, at cost to myself, I paused. I asked myself a question I had never thought to ask before. Has this person shown up for me? Not in 1962. Not in some golden past I'd gilded with nostalgia. Recently, concretely. The answer, more often than I expected, was no. And so I began, quietly and without announcement, to adjust. My son rang me 3 months into this and said, "Dad, you've changed. You seem cold." He didn't mean it cruelly. He was used to the man who covered for everyone, who was always available, always generous to a fault, who gave everything to everyone and never seemed to run dry. I told him, "I haven't changed. I've just stopped pretending." He went quiet on the phone. I could hear him breathing. He didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't push for one. That was new too, the not pushing. The willingness to let a silence be a silence, instead of rushing to fill it with reassurance I didn't feel. It cost me something, that conversation. My son and I were awkward with each other for nearly a year. I won't pretend otherwise. But I kept at it, kept asking the question. Behavior, not history. Behavior, not intention. What has this person actually done? After 3 years, something had shifted that I hadn't anticipated. The relationships I had left, the ones that survived the quiet adjustment, were different, deeper, reciprocal in a way none of my old arrangements had ever been. A man named Philip, a solicitor I'd known since the early 70s but never counted as a close friend, started ringing me on Sunday mornings just to talk. No agenda, no favor to ask, just conversation. It took me 6 months to stop waiting for the request that never came. And a woman from my church, Agnes, 71 years old, sharp as a tack, no patience for sentiment, became the most honest friend I'd had since Eleanor. She told me things I didn't want to hear. She showed up when it wasn't convenient. She never once used the word loyalty. She just was. Now, at 94, I have 4 people in my life I trust without reservation. 4. In 94 years of living, 4 people have shown me consistently in behavior, not words, not history, not warmth at Christmas, that they are genuinely present. I used to think that number was a tragedy. I understand now it is the truth. Most people go their entire lives without 4. Some go with none, surrounded by dozens. Here is what 94 years have taught me, and I want you to hear each of these slowly. First, loyalty is not a personality trait. It is a behavior, and behaviors change with circumstances. The man who is loyal to you in prosperity is showing you something, yes, but not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is what he does when loyalty costs him something, when it is inconvenient, when it puts him at risk. That is the only version of loyalty worth a single thing, and it is extraordinarily rare. Most people who describe themselves as loyal, who use that word freely, proudly as a central part of their identity have simply not yet been tested. The test always comes. Watch what happens then. Second, the people who speak loudest about loyalty are often the least capable of it. I have noticed this pattern so consistently across so many decades, so many industries, so many contexts, that I no longer treat it as coincidence. Gerald talked about loyalty constantly. He used it as a kind of currency, invoking it when he needed something, depositing it as a promise he had no intention of keeping. The quietest people I have known, the ones who never gave speeches about their own faithfulness, were the ones who were actually there. Everyone says loyalty is the bedrock of every great relationship. Society builds entire mythologies around it, the loyal soldier, the devoted friend. But here is the truth. Loyalty, as most people practice it, is conditional. It lasts precisely as long as it is comfortable, and not 1 minute longer. Third, expecting loyalty, and I mean the expecting, the assuming, the sense of entitlement to it, is not a virtue. I spent 60 years believing it was noble to trust people completely before they had earned it. I called it generosity. I called it faith in human nature. What it actually was, I see now, is a form of control, dressed up in virtue's clothing. When you extend loyalty as an assumption, you are not giving a gift, you are setting a trap. You are creating a debt the other person never agreed to carry, and then you feel betrayed when they don't repay it. That is not their failure. That is your accounting error. I'm not saying this to wound. I'm saying it because I made this mistake for 6 decades, and it very nearly broke me. Fourth, most betrayals are not dramatic. They are not the knife in the back, the sudden revelation, the confrontation at the door. They are quiet. They are a phone call not returned, a slight coolness at dinner, a favor redirected, a silence where a word of support should have been. They accumulate, the way water finds its way through stone, slowly, invisibly, until one Thursday night you are sitting alone with a 3-paragraph letter and the arithmetic finally adds up. Watch for the small withdrawals. They are telling you something true. Now, and I want to be careful here because I have seen this misunderstood, I am not saying live behind walls. I am not telling you to become suspicious of every kindness, to audit every friendship, to treat warmth as a threat. That would be its own tragedy, and a lonelier one than anything I have described. What I am saying is this: loyalty is not a coin you deposit and expect returned. It is a plant. It either grows in the soil of a person's character or it doesn't. You cannot will it into existence by modeling it. You cannot guilt it into bloom. You can only create the conditions, be consistent, be honest, be present, and then watch, clearly, without illusion, what actually grows. Some soil will surprise you, most will not. And that is not a reason for despair. That is simply the truth, and the truth, even a hard one, is a kinder companion than a comfortable lie. Now, about you. If you are watching this, I suspect someone came to mind in the first 30 seconds of this video. A name, maybe a face, maybe a particular silence that still sits in your chest when you think about it. You know exactly what I am describing. That specific ache of having given something genuine to someone who received it as ordinary, as their due, as nothing worth acknowledging. You are probably still making excuses for them. You probably tell yourself they are going through something. You tell yourself this isn't who they really are, that the real version, the one you chose, the one you told everyone about, will return when things settle down. I did the same thing. For 60 years, I was the most creative excuse maker in West Yorkshire. I had a rationalization for every withdrawal, an explanation for every silence. What I did not have was clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is an act of self-respect. So here is what I want you to do. Not in theory, not someday, but this week. First, write down 3 names, people you call loyal, people you have organized your trust around. Then, next to each name, write not how you feel about them, not your history together, not their intentions. Write what they have actually done in the last 12 months to demonstrate that they are present in your life. Behaviors. Concrete, specific, observable behaviors. Not the dinner in 2019, not what they said at your father's funeral. What they have done lately when it cost them something to show up. That list will tell you more than 60 years of feeling told me. Second, stop performing loyalty for people who are not watching. You know what I mean. The phone calls you make that are never returned at the same depth. The effort you extend that is received without acknowledgement. The way you show up again and again to a relationship that is only being maintained by your own momentum. If you stopped tomorrow, if you simply went quiet, would they notice? Would they reach? That question is not cruel. It is the most important question you can ask. I know you are thinking, but we have 20 years of history. Yes, and Gerald and I had 28. Time is not evidence of loyalty. Time is only evidence of time. Third, and this is the hardest one, give yourself permission to love someone and simultaneously accept who they actually are. Not who you need them to be. Not the version you constructed in the early days when everything was possible and nobody had been tested yet. Who they have shown you they are. You don't need their permission to adjust your expectations. You are not cold for noticing the pattern. You are not bitter for finally doing the arithmetic. You are not disloyal for protecting the years you have left. It is okay. I am telling you, it is okay to quietly, privately, without announcement or confrontation, stop expecting the tide to remember you. I am 94 years old. I will not see another decade. I know that with the matter-of-fact certainty of a man who has watched enough people leave to know how the departure looks. And I need you to hear me when I say, you have less time than you think. Not in a morbid way, in a practical, urgent, entirely loving way. You have spent, right now, today, more of your life than you realize waiting for people to become who you need them to be. Waiting for the loyalty to materialize. Waiting for the investment to pay. And later, you tell yourself, I will address this later. Later, when things calm down. Later, when the time is right. I need you to understand something I learned at 58, sitting in an armchair at 2 in the morning. There is no later. Later is the most expensive word in the English language. I have watched men and women spend the entirety of their good years, their healthy years, their clear-eyed years, in later. Later never came for them. It will not come for you either. If your parents are still alive, I mean this, put this video down when it ends and ring them. Not to discuss any of this, just to hear their voice. Because one day, without warning, without any respect for your schedule or your readiness, you will get a call. And every question you didn't ask, every visit you postponed, every conversation you left for later will be waiting for you on the other side of that call with nowhere left to go. And your children, if you have them, one day you will reach for them and they will not need you in the same way, and you will realize you cannot identify the last time they did because it passed without ceremony, without your noticing. Do not spend those years performing loyalty to people who are not present enough to receive it. The plant either grows in the soil or it doesn't. Stop standing in an empty field waiting for a harvest. Don't be 94 years old recounting, as I have just done for you, the names of people who borrowed your loyalty and gave you a 3-paragraph letter in return. Don't spend your 40s and your 50s and your 60s on that accounting. I'm telling you this. I want to be clear about this, not from bitterness. The bitterness burned out of me somewhere in my late 60s and left something quieter behind. I'm telling you this because every word of it cost me something I cannot recover. Gerald, David, Martin, Eleanor at the kitchen sink. 14 years of a marriage I stayed in for the wrong reasons. 60,000 pounds in uncollected debts from men I called friends. I paid for every word of this in the only currency that matters. The least I can do, the very least, is hand it to you before it costs you the same. I told you at the beginning that loyalty is the most dangerous word you carry. Now you understand why. Not because it is worthless, but because the gap between what you mean by it and what most people are capable of is where the damage lives. That gap is where I spent 60 years. I am asking you not to. Here is the whole of it, as plainly as I can say it. Stop expecting the tide to remember you. Watch behavior, not history. Trust slowly, observe carefully, and love people as they actually are, not as you require them to be. It is a smaller life on the surface, 4 people instead of 40. But it is a real life. A life where the ground beneath you is actually solid. At 94, with no debts of false loyalty remaining, I sleep without resentment for the first time in my adult life. I want that for you while you are still young enough to build it properly. It took me until my 60s to arrive here. I want it to take you half as long. Leave me a comment. Tell me, and you don't need to name them. You don't need any detail at all. Just tell me. Did someone come to mind? Just say, I know exactly who. I will read every one. If this reached you, share it with one person who needs to hear it before it costs them what it cost me. Like it if it landed. Subscribe if you want more of this. More people who have lived long enough to say the thing plainly without softening it into something easier to swallow. There are more of us here. We are not finished talking. I am 94 years old. I make tea every morning in the same chipped blue pot I have had since 1967. I have 4 people I trust. I have no outstanding debts of false faith. I have made my peace with Gerald, with David, with Martin, with Eleanor's back at the kitchen sink. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. Now go make yours. Be well.